Rio was a sad, pathetic, ugly loser who had no friends because he spent all of his money simping on idols and lived a depressing, worthless life. Until one day, his parents died in a terrible plane crash, leaving him all alone to care for his little brother, Kotaro. The two were eventually adopted by the chairwoman of a local school, where Kotaro worked as a babysitter to a group of pesky kids with hot MILF moms. Excited that they would finally get a new family, Rio and Kotaro went over to the school the next morning, with the intention of making a good impression. However, they were met with a look of disapproval from the chairwoman, as she was angry at them for coming late. She immediately began quizzing Rio on his skills as a big brother, and told him that as payment for living rent-free with her, Rio would have to become the new babysitter in charge of the school's daycare facility. He was shocked by this statement, because he hoped he could return to his old ways. But he eventually warmed up to the idea, even telling Seikawa that he would be the best babysitter to all the kids, making the lame secretary cry, who wiped his face with a napkin before leaving Rio to his daycare duties. The kids had no idea that the daycare was getting a new employee, and they were scared when Rio stepped in to introduce himself, so they gathered around their babysitter, Uzeda, who was busy slacking off near the shelf. One of the kids, Taka, pulled hard on the babysitter's ear, which woke him up from sleep, and he almost cursed at the little devil before getting up to give Rio and Kotaro a proper welcome. Uzeda told the kids to introduce themselves as well, and they did a little dance while doing so. But when it was time for Kotaro to introduce himself, he didn't give back the same energy, and Taka immediately told the kids to attack him for being a lifeless troll. However, Rio stepped in to protect his brother by letting the kids beat him up instead, and after seeing that they were all too wild for him to play with, Kotaro walked away to the bookshelf to grab a storybook. Uzeda noticed that Kotaro was feeling lonely after losing his brother to the daycare rascals, so he offered to read his storybook out to him. But Kotaro declined because he learned from Andrew Tate to never let his weaknesses show. Uzeda's shift came to an end, and he gave Rio some final instructions before leaving him alone to handle the madhouse, while he went off to meet his girlfriend at the movies. Kirin, the only girl in the group, told Rio to join in on her imaginary lunch, but just as she was about to convince him to play along, the twins, Takuma and Kazuma, ran through the entire food on the floor, making her boil inside with anger. Kazuma, the crybaby in the group, tripped and fell on his face while chasing his twin brother, and he was about to cry out a river like Justin Timberlake when Rio and Takuma came over to console him. But then the youngest in the group, Midori, began to cry, and he went over to cuddle her while struggling with the Taka. Kotaro continued to read his storybook, while secretly observing how the other kids were having fun with his brother, and when Rio asked if he was doing okay, he lied and said yes, so he could maintain his top G status. At nighttime, the moms came over to pick their kids, and Rio used this as an opportunity to introduce himself as a versatile caregiver with experience in pampering not just kids, but their beautiful MILFs as well.
What did he say?
They all smiled, telling him to see them at their offices sometime. Because his mom was busy grading test scripts, Taka's brother, Hayato, came over to pick him up instead. And when Taka tried throwing a tantrum to remain with Rio at the daycare, Hayato gave him a hard whack on the head, which brought him back to his senses. Rio told Hayato to avoid being violent with Taka, but Hayato advised him to mind his own business, as his little brother, Kotaro, was looking very lonely by the corner of the room. Rio took his advice and went over to talk with Kotaro, but just as he was about to make it up to him for having fun with the others, Kotaro fell onto his lap, his face burning with fever. Rio immediately rushed outside, where he met Hayato, who escorted him to the nearest child hospital, after dropping Taka off with their mom. And on the way there, Rio kept on blaming himself for not paying attention to his brother while they were at the daycare. At the hospital, the doctor informed Rio that Kotaro's fever was a minor problem that would resolve itself in the morning, and he went outside to let his parents know about the situation on the phone. But when he remembered that they had died in the plane crash, he broke down in tears. At that moment, the chairwoman appeared and consoled him, telling him that it was alright to cry sometimes, rather than bottling up his feelings to seem strong. She explained to him that she also lost her only son in the plane crash that killed his parents, and promised to always look after him and his little brother for as long as they remained with her. Rio was deeply moved by those words, so he went back inside to find Kotaro, who had been crying since he woke up, and upon bringing him closer, they let out all the pent-up tears since the death of their parents. The following morning, the grumpy old chairwoman burst into Ryo's room and yelled at him for being lazy and wasting her time, so she instructed him to get off his bed and prepare for school, also adding that he would be spending his entire break time at the daycare. To get back at her, Kotaro tugged on her hair and called her a shaggy old woman, so she threatened to give him a similar hairstyle. However, before leaving, she showed Ryo his new uniform, although he initially wanted to manage an old pair, and he was shocked that she would go through the trouble of getting him a new one when he was just months away from finishing middle school. After dropping his baby brother at the daycare, Ryo walked to class and noticed that his schoolmates kept giggling as he walked past them, until he met Hayato, who told him that it was because the kids had been following him. Surprised, Ryo asked them why they weren't in the daycare, and they said that Kotaro wanted to follow him, so they all backed him up. In that instant, they began to embarrass him and started asking him to play with them, so Hayato threatened them with his iron fist. His younger brother called him a poopy head, after which he ran in tears, until he accidentally bumped into a mean-looking girl. Ryo apologized, but the fierce lady wasn't having it, so she questioned why he had brought his daycare battalion to disturb the peace of their school. However, this only scared the children, and they ran towards Ryo. Apparently, the mean girl was an Amada of Class A, who was the most brilliant girl in the school, but her actions made people gossip about her mean attitude, saying that she was way too hard on Ryo. Meanwhile, when the guys got to the daycare, they met Uzeda snoring away as usual, so Hayato jerked him from dreamland with a hard knock. On the other hand, the kids were still sad, so Ryo was trying to cheer them up, but when an Amada came in to drop off Taka's lunch, they ran away in fear as they clung tightly to their savior. Seeing this, Uzeda faked a cry about a non-existent stomach ache and told Hayato to take him to the nurse's office. Then he immediately asked an Amada to assist Ryo in watching over the kids, putting her in an awkward situation. Noticing this, Ryo told her that she was free to leave because he could handle the kids alone, but she said she was going to help since Uzeda had asked her to. She then offered to hold the baby, and unfortunately became frantic, so the baby was frightened and started crying, and this caused the other kids to gang up against her and retaliate by threatening to give her the biggest beating of her life. However, as soon as she shot them a very dark and scary look, they all scurried away in fear, backing down instantly. But this only upset her, and her eyes began to swell up with tears. When Ryo noticed it, he told the kids to apologize for their bad behavior, but she told him that she didn't want a forced apology from the spoiled brats, and Ryo smiled, saying they weren't brats. This made an Amada angry even more, and she threw toys at him, saying that the kids really liked him while she was hated by everyone, because she was only good at studying and nothing else. At that point, she had burst into tears, so the cute little ones moved towards her, apologizing for their behavior towards her. And they started crying too, so she embraced them as they all continued their tearful gathering, until they fell asleep in a warm cuddle. Later, Kotaro was upset because Taka mocked him for wearing a shirt with a tiger's picture, even though he had never actually seen one. Hayato, in his usual habit, didn't hesitate to reset his baby brother's head with his iron fist, and it led Taka to assume that his elder brother hated him. Worsening the situation, Hayato coldly said that he didn't particularly like or hate him. Then Taka burst in tears, concluding that he hated him, so he continued to throw a fit, and his brother took him away. Ryo, on the other hand, planned to take Kotaro to the zoo later that weekend, but the other children wanted to share in the fun, and Uzeda seized the opportunity to make some cash for himself. At home, Ryo sought the old lady's permission to take the kids on the zoo trip, telling her that he had spoken to their mothers, and so she agreed to it, but refused to pay the lazy Uzeda for working during weekend hours. She also declined Ryo's invitation to the zoo, calling it a stinky place, and later on, Seikawa gave Ryo their lunch pack, along with some money from the chairwoman. At the zoo, Uzeda had found another way to cash out, and after rejecting the money that he was offered, he told Ryo that he would sell pictures of the kids to their respective fathers. Meanwhile, Hayato dropped Taka off because he had to go for baseball practice, so they started visiting the animals, from cute elephants to scary tigers, while the money-hungry Uzeda captured all the memories. Later, they had lunch together, and afterwards, Kotaro pointed to some sheep, calling them Shaggy, because they reminded him of the old lady's hairstyle. Seeing a bird, Taka said his name translated into the name of that bird, but when Ryo pointed at a falcon, which was the meaning of Hayato's name, Taka aggressively denied ever having an older brother. Afterwards, they visited a toy shop and the children's eyes were wandering over everything they saw. So when Kotaro saw a toy that looked like his shaggy old woman, he wanted one, and Ryo went to pay for the toy, leaving Taka in Uzade's care. Trying to cheer Taka up, Uzade offered to get him a souvenir for his older brother, but the stubborn kid refused one. However, while Uzade wasn't looking, the child saw someone that looked like his older brother and started running after him, so Ryo returned to find that Taka was missing, and they went searching for him. Meanwhile, Taka found out that the man he saw wasn't his brother, but he continued running, until he stumbled and started crying out for his older brother. Just then, big brother Hayato came to the rescue and held him as he cried, but it was a brief moment of cuddling, after which Hayato's iron fist made Taka apologize for causing them trouble. Later, everyone said goodbye, and Ryo commended Hayato for showing up, because Taka was lonely in his absence. But he said that he only came because he had received a beating from their mother for leaving him behind. Taka warmly told his older brother that he loved him, and Hayato, in his cold nature, replied saying that he didn't hate him either, while letting Ryo know that Kotaro had so much love for him. At school, the girls discussed which guys to give their Valentine's Day presents to, asking Yuki if she had anyone special in mind, but she quickly said she didn't. Meanwhile, the boys also discussed whether they would receive presents, and they were fortunate to witness Hayato being handed a present from a girl, but he outright refused it, which made the others upset. While they continued discussing the Valentine's Day gifts, Ryo wondered how the strict Inamata would react if she found out that students were breaking the rule of not giving presents. At the same time, some girls in Inamata's class gave gifts to Yagi, but then she suddenly got angry and told them to think about their actions, and they started complaining that she was being cold and unfriendly. However, Yagi stepped in and calmed them down, assuring them that they could give him the presents later outside school hours, and told Inamata that he was interested in joining the babysitter club because he loves taking care of children. But when he asked her how to join, she snapped and told him that she didn't know anything about it. She then left and started thinking that she was cursed and everyone would hate her, and because of this, she was scared to join the babysitters club, fearing that the children would also dislike her. But despite her fear, she wiped away her tears and decided to stay strong by focusing only on her studies. Yagi met Ryo in the daycare room and told him that he wanted to become a babysitter, but Ryo became confused and went to call the others, and when they arrived, he introduced everyone to Yagi. Yagi also introduced himself, but Ryo remembered hearing Yagi's name as the one who the girls referred to as the most handsome and cool guy. However, Yagi humbly said that Ryo was more handsome while Hayato was much cooler, making Taka delighted, while the other children joined in on the excitement, and as he showered them with compliments, he showcased how good he was with children, causing Ryo's admiration and respect for him to grow even stronger. Meanwhile, in the cafeteria, Inamata overheard some students saying that Yagi was only lying about liking children, and he had evil intentions towards them. Concerned for the children's safety, Inamata hurried to the daycare room, and just as Yagi was about to make a creepy move towards Kotaro, Inamata arrived in the nick of time to prevent further blood spill. However, she was shocked to realize that Yagi was only poking Kotaro's cute cheek with his finger, and at that moment, another person entered the room, and Ryo asked him who he was. The person introduced himself as Nezu, and he went on to reveal that Yagi had a complex concerning children, making him potentially unsafe for them. Ryo and Uzade gathered the children together to protect them from him. Yagi got escorted out of the room by Nezu, but he promised the kids that he would return to play with them in the future, even though they insisted on continuing to play with him at that moment. Despite their pleas, Nezu prevented Yagi from going back, so the kids turned to Inamata and asked her to stay and play with them. But she suddenly got serious and frightened the hell out of the children. However, she had a change of heart and promised to return another time with chocolates, which made them all happy. After school, Ryo accompanied Inamata as she was leaving, but then suddenly asked her to wait for a moment while he went to fetch something for her, and when he returned, he and Kotaro presented her with a Valentine's Day gift. She accepted the gift but couldn't help complaining that it was still against the rules, but Ryo told her that he believes she was genuinely kind-hearted, and that he really liked that about her, before quickly running off. Inamata's face flushed with embarrassment due to his kind gesture, but unknown to them, someone lurking around the corner was about to misinterpret the whole situation. The following day at school, the boys had to wear shorts for gym class, but they were all shivering from the cold except for Hayato. Ryo asked him how he managed to stay warm, and Hayato replied that he was simply enduring it. which led the other boys to ask if Hayato was a robot disguised as a human. At that moment, Uzeda arrived with the children on a trolley, and they excitedly hopped off and rushed to meet Ryo, telling him to play with them. All of a sudden, his freezing friends called out to him, letting him know that they had been waiting for him, and he felt sorry for wasting their time. But they reassured him that there was no need to apologize. They had another idea in mind, which was to use the kids as natural heating packs in order to keep themselves warm. But amidst the chaos, Takuma crawled into a nearby bush and was unexpectedly snatched by Baba Yaga. Ryo immediately sprang into action. However, Hayato quickly realized that Ryo wouldn't reach in time. He launched his shoe at the abductor, taking him out in an instant. The mask was off, and Ryo asked Takuma if he knew the person. But to his surprise, Takuma happily said that it was his father. They quickly took him to the daycare room, where he introduced himself as Kasuke, Takuma and Kazuma's father, and they apologized for mistaking him as an enemy, but asked why he had to wear a hat and sunglasses. Uzeda explained that Kasuke was an actor trying to avoid causing a scene with his fans, but they mentioned that they had never seen any of his commercials before, which made him realize that he wasn't very popular, and so he retreated to a corner. Feeling completely miserable, Ryo approached him and asked why he had come all the way, and he explained that he wanted to see his kids, but he felt like they didn't want to see him and had forgotten he was their dad. Ryo assured him that it wasn't the case, saying he should stick around and play with them to strengthen their bond, to which he agreed. He went to fetch Takuma and Kazuma and handed them over to their father, but when Kazuma was in his arms, he started to cry, which made him feel even more disheartened. But Ryo stopped him and explained that Kazuma didn't know him very well, which was why he was crying. But Hayato pointed out that Ryo's words weren't helping the situation. Ryo encouraged the father not to give up, and suggested that he spend the whole day with the kids, and Hayato added that he was embarrassing himself in front of the children. They all started making fun of him, calling him a crybaby, making the situation even worse for him. However, Uzeda reassured him that it was okay because the kids would learn that adults have flaws, but Ryo disagreed with Uzeda's point of view. After some recovery, the father attempted to bond with the kids by giving them piggyback rides, playing horsey, and all sorts of things, but unfortunately, all of his efforts ended in failure. They began whispering among themselves, trying to figure out why the children hated their father so much. But he overheard their conversation and told them it was okay, apologizing to Takuma and Kazuma for intruding into their lives and thanking everyone for their help before deciding to leave. On his way out, he bumped into a girl who instantly recognized him as a famous actor and screamed his name, causing everyone to come out of their hiding places and rush towards him, begging for his autograph. Amidst the chaos, the father could only hear one voice, the voices of his own children, Takuma and Kazuma, crying out for him not to go. He struggled to push through the crowd to move closer towards them, but the love-struck teenage girls were far too many. Just then, the twins' mother, Yumi, arrived and ordered everyone to back off for their safety, threatening to call the chairwoman, and everyone immediately obeyed and ran off to class. Yumi walked up to him and explained that the reason the kids were scared of him was because they had all watched a movie where he played the role of a very bad character. Asking why she showed them such a movie, she told him that the kids were always asking to see his face on TV, and she reassured him that he looked very cool in the movie. The kids tugged on his clothes, finally agreeing to let him play with them. And overwhelmed with joy, Kasuke cried tears of joy as he embraced his kids, while Ryo and Kataru watched the heartwarming scene unfold, feeling touched and happy for them all. On a bright spring morning, Ryo was getting ready for his epic first day of high school, and with his parents gone, he was left to tackle the challenging maze of high school on his own. Looking to recruit more members to the babysitter club, he decided to make a poster, but there was no room left. While walking into the daycare center, Kotaro slowly ran towards him, but the other children were super fast, jumping on him and leaving Kotaro with a poster on his face. Uzeda teased Ryo for his dorky poster and asked him to join them on an epic adventure to the other clubs, and he reluctantly agreed, but felt embarrassed to follow them dancing through the halls. The first stop was the drama club, and Kirin quickly opened the door, only to be terrified when her mother, Yaoi, greeted the crew dressed up as a creepy ghost with interesting makeup. She asked Ryoi to join the drama club, but just as he was about to fall for her acting skills, he noticed the other members getting brainwashed with the same marketing technique, and he held on to his goal of becoming the #1 babysitter. Eager to satisfy their sweet tooth, the gang made their way to the cooking room, separated from Ryo and Uzeda, hoping to get a taste of the heavenly cookies. However, they had to wait for the next batch of cookies to get ready, and when Inamata noticed the children, she got angry at Ryo for letting them run around carelessly. Apologizing for interrupting his practice, Ryo watched as the members had fun together. The children asked where they were going next, and Ryo decided to place the club poster and asked Uzeda to take care of the children. To his surprise, when Kotaro was invited to join him, he shook his head, leaving Ryo to go alone to the bulletin board. Feeling that Kotaro was better off without him, Ryo quietly sat down, consumed by sadness, after trying to hang the poster in a corner of the bulletin board only to be approached moments later by Hayato, who asked if he could join the club, telling him that his little brother had recruited him to offer help. Ryo opened his eyes, sensing something heavy on his chest, only to discover Kotaro fast asleep, and as he gently woke Kotaro, he noticed his voice had changed. But at that moment, the chairwoman barged into the room, forcing him to get up, and she gasped when Ryo suddenly collapsed on the floor. Struggling to lift Kotaro off his chest while repeatedly falling, Seikawa teased Ryo in his new voice, saying that puberty had finally struck. But the chairwoman hit him on the head with her cane for his terrible humor and bad timing, and asked him to fetch a thermometer, while instructing Ryo to rest before dragging Kotaro away from him. Kotaro followed the chairwoman's lead, while calling her a shaggy sheep, and they set out to concoct a medicine for his sick brother that would lower his spiking fever and bring back his good health. As she sliced a lemon, Kotaro believed that she was a demon lady, and that she was forcing him to work for her and squeeze the juice into the cup. However, his little fingers were only good for holding Ryo's hands, and when she offered to help, he declined, as per Top G guidelines. Eventually, he managed to build enough to get a single drop into the cup, and the chairwoman asked him to fill the cup with enough juice to cover the bottom, so Kotaro continued to squeeze out the juice with his new chakra technique. After finally sucking the last bit of juice from the lemon, he accidentally knocked it over as he stood up, causing the chairwoman to hand him the remaining half of the lemon, encouraging him to try again, and secretly admiring his determination. While sleeping, Ryo had a bad dream about his family, where his parents left him and took Kotaro along with them. Upon waking up, Ryo found Kotaro hovering over him, who helped wipe the tears streaming down his eyes, but his hands left a stinging after effect from the lemons he had squeezed for Ryo to get better. The chairwoman handed Ryo the medicine that she and Kotaro made, and as Ryo thanked the heavens for not taking his little brother away, Kotaro smiled while Ryo patted his head, as he was happy to be finally reunited with his big brother once again. However, Kotaro was confused when the chairwoman picked him up, announcing that he must leave. Despite him telling her that Ryo had taken the elixir he made, she still insisted that his brother needed rest. Wanting to protect Kotaro from catching his cold, Ryo told him to wait patiently until he recovered, and he drifted off into a peaceful slumber. However, Kotaro was curled up under a chair, refusing to eat anything or talk to anyone until his brother got out of bed. Yukari dropped off Midori at the daycare center with Ryo, who told Kotaro that they would read a picture book together while waiting for the others when Midori dropped the bomb. He wanted to disarm the bomb but noticed there was no more ass wipes when the baby crawled over to the door only to be met by Inui. His face twisted in disgust because of the smell, and he fell to the ground while Ryo and Kotaro watched in shock. The student continued to complain, calling Midori a poop factory and Kotaro a space cadet. But Ryo wasn't going to have that, and he defended his little brother before asking about his relationship with Midori. He told them he was there to catch a glimpse of his future daughter, and when Ryo panicked, Inui laughed, telling him that he couldn't possibly understand, given his lack of romantic experience. Before exiting the room, the duo looked surprised by his failure to recognize his future daughter. Later, Uzeda tried to get Ryo's attention because he was lost in thoughts. Kirin told him that he had been sleeping with his eyes open like a watchdog, and although he apologized to Kotaro for not reading the book to him, he promised to do so after class. Ryo asked Uzeda about Midori's father, who told him that Midori's father was on a treasure hunt overseas, and this made him horrified by the possibility of Yukari cheating on him with Inui. Uzeda playfully asked if he had a preference for mature women with large melons, but Ryo strongly denied it. Approaching Hayato for advice, he told him that it was the couple's decision, but Ryo felt it was unfair for the child. Even so, Hayato stood his ground, insisting that he stayed out of matters of romance between adults, forcing Ryo to accept his decision even though Midori would get hurt. Like a detective, Ryo started thinking about his lack of romantic experience when he remembered how others praised Yuki for looking like a goddess, and when he looked at her, though he felt nothing, he made her turn into a blushing tomato. Ryo accidentally bumped into Inamada in the hallway and received a scolding for not watching his steps. But he needed advice, so he asked Inamada about her thoughts on forbidden love. She told him that cheaters deserve to be hanged, and hearing those words, he asked if she ever had a crush on someone. But Inamada just clenched her fist, knowing well that she lived a boring life. Returning to the daycare center, Ryo discovered the mischievous children shooting snot on a scared Inui, while Uzeda laid relaxed, and Kotaro held out the Cinderella book. Immediately, Ryo gathered the children and provided them tissues to blow their snots, but Inui stood up like a tiger about to pounce on his prey, and told him that the person he called Poop Factory was actually Midori. Inui felt that he had been lied to, but Ryo defended himself, saying that chasing after forbidden love was wrong. To which Inui agreed, showing his undying respect for married women. He told him that her husband was in heaven. Yakuri entered the daycare. He saw Inui but couldn't remember his name. Blushing with embarrassment, Inui gathered the courage to approach Yukari. But before he could speak, Midori's crying interrupted him. Yukari, comforting her daughter, revealed that her husband, who had been away on a treasure hunt, was returning soon. Inui was too shocked to say anything, yet offered to look after Midori whenever Yukari and her husband wished to spend time together. While crying in a corner, Inui was playfully attacked by the children, which led him to lash out at Uzeda for participating in the situation, warning him that he would become an object of mockery. Inui's laughter filled the room, trying to mask his pain as Ryo imagined the feeling of losing love, hoping to find his own romantic happiness. Ryo and the kids were absorbed in their roleplay, but Kirin was so focused on her painting, she didn't pay attention because it felt childish. Kirin showed them her drawing of witches, and said that if they all studied hard, they could become great witches. But Taka exploded, saying that witches were a big fake and that superheroes were the only real people with powers. Having a standoff, they posed for a staring contest, and when Kotaro tried to stop them, they pushed him away while the two exchanged punches. The next day, Taka brought a picture of a superhero holding him, showing the others that superheroes were actually real. He pointed out to Kirin, asking her for proof that witches actually existed. But she didn't want to lose the bet, so she told them she was going to fly. Kirin was determined to fly on a broom and she practiced outside. But Taka didn't believe in her chances and asked the others to come play heroes indoors while Kirin stayed to practice. Looking for advice, Hayato advised Ryo to tell Midori the truth. He felt it was wrong to shatter a child's dream. And when he reminded Hayato of his dream to make a disappearing curveball, he told him that his dream was actually possible, unlike Kirin's. Overhearing their conversation, Inamada asked if anything had happened to the children, but Hayato made fun of her and asked if she wanted to join their conversation. She angrily walked away when Ryo stopped her for advice, and to their surprise, she offered to bring documents and materials when they were free. During lunch, she brought books that talked about the historical evidence, but when Ryo looked at it, he felt this wasn't something the kids needed to know, forcing a frustrated Inamada to storm out of the class. Thinking of a solution, his mind drifted to the chairwoman, picturing her as a witch, before heading for the library to find an answer. Meanwhile, Uzeda tried to make the little witch come back inside, but she remained determined not to lose the bet, and she spotted a ledge that tempted her to jump off. Ryo approached the daycare center, holding books on witches, and when he saw Kirin about to leap, he dropped his books, racing to her aid and catching her midway. Concerned for her safety, he asked if she was alright, but Kirin broke into tears as Ryo embraced her, and reflecting on Hayato's advice, he felt guilty for not telling her the truth. The chairwoman approached them, and asking why Kirin was crying, the little Miss Wannabe told her that she couldn't fly on a broomstick, so the chairwoman told her that she was 100 years too early to learn such a trick. Kirin's eyes widened as she asked if the chairwoman could fly on a broom, and with a mysterious smile, the chairwoman left it up to Kirin's imagination, before asking them to go inside. Inside the daycare, Taka suggested that they played witches, but also pointed out the need to play heroes together. Pinning up the laundry, Ryo noticed that Kotaro was watching an ant swarm and warned him to stay within the grounds, but still allowed him to play around when Kotaro appeared holding onto Ryo's leg, pointing somewhere. Soon, they came across Kichai, who ran away from home trapped in a bush, and when Ryo tried to help him out, Kichai angrily slapped his hand away. This action made Kotaro shocked, but Ryo quickly comforted his younger brother, telling him that he was unharmed. Noticing the resemblance, Ryo asked if he was Nezu's brother, so he silently nodded and asked how he knew his brother. Ryo told him that they went to the same school, and when he asked if something happened at home, Kimchi remained quiet. Ryo tried to offer support by forming a bond through communication, but the vigilant Kichai asked why Ryo was doing the laundry despite living in a rich household. As he blushed, he told him they were more like freeloaders in the chairwoman's home before he quickly returned to complete the laundry. On his way, Ryo realized he doesn't have Nezu's number and is unable to call him, but when they arrived, they found Yagi holding Kitaro's cheeks with a nosebleed. While Inamata threatened to call the police on him, Ryo was surprised that they knew each other and was glad that she wasn't a loner. Pointing to Ryo, when Inamata wanted to know why he invited Yagi to his house, Ryo told her that Nezu couldn't make it because of work, so Yagi came instead. However, Inamata told them working part-time is against the rules at Morinomiya Academy, but she couldn't help but be impressed by Nezu's ability to excel academically while working. Inamata found out that he was given permission to support his family of 8, and this made her scold Kichai, who refused to go home or talk about his situation before labeling him as a spoiled brat for causing his family trouble by running away. As Kichai burst into tears, he told them that he just wanted to sneak into the chairwoman's home, hoping to find video games. But Ryo sensed a deeper meaning behind his words, and when Inamata asked if he had run away because of a mere game, Tsukichi popped out from the bushes, defending the children's right to own anything they desire. He told them that Kichai's friends kept on teasing him because he doesn't have a video game, and despite his family struggles, he still loved them, but hated the fact they were broke. Recalling a familiar situation that happened during his elementary school, Yagi laughed, and just when Inamata was about to scold him, he tells them about a popular video game everyone was into. But Nezu was a lone wolf, lacking the means to own it. In his flashback, he offered Nezu his video game to borrow and play with, but he refused, telling Yagi his resolve to build any game he wants to play. And with those words, Yagi thought he was cool. With Kichai feeling down about not knowing how to make games, Yagi stepped in to highlight what made his brother cool, which was the fact he was born into a household where nothing was bought for him, and this made Kichai realize how hardworking his brother was. Inspired by the story, Kichai finally decided to come out, and with the two brothers out of the bushes, Kichai tells Inamata about his new resolve to work hard just like his older brother, and when they were about to leave, Nezu enters with a box of manju. He apologized to Ryo for his troubles and handed them a box, and when Inamata asked why she got one as well, Nezu told them that his brothers liked her. The boys apologized for troubling Nezu, who forgave them and gave Kichai the game he wanted because he had taken on extra shifts to afford it, thanks to a tip from Tsukichi and their father providing the money. Uzeda taunted the children, holding a toy car just out of their reach as he asked Ryo why he couldn't come for lunch. He told him that he had to finish his chemistry report, begging Uzeda not to bully the children. As Ryo left for his class, he left behind his lunchbox, and the hungry children stared at it, but Uzeda apologized, stating that he couldn't let them eat it. He felt that Ryo would soon notice and return for his lunchbox, but he was captivated by the sparkle in Kitaro's eyes as the young boy tugged on his pants, showing his desire to deliver his brother's lunch. Wearing a tag with his brother's name, Kitaro left the daycare center alone while Uzeda watched, worried for his safety. Inui felt lonely and tried to move on from his feelings for Yukari, but he was caught off guard when a photo of his lost love was placed as a trophy. As Kitaro walked down the hallways, students noticed and whispered amongst themselves, yet despite their offers to help, Kitaro was determined to take the lunch to his brother himself and prove that he was a man of his own. Frustrated at the lack of student intervention, Inui reflected on how he ended up looking after a child on this errand, and watched as Kitaro took his first step up the stairs. Ryo, checking his bag in confusion for his forgotten lunch, was approached by Hayato, who asked what was wrong. But his words were not understandable as Ryo reminded him not to speak with food in his mouth. He decided to run to the daycare center for his lunch before starting his report, only for Yuki to offer him her own lunch, claiming she was on a diet, and insisting that he ate it even after refusing her offer initially. Kitaro struggled up the stairs while Inui prayed for Yama's intervention, but two students accidentally knocked him off, forcing him to drop the lunchbox and fall. The lunchbox tumbled down the stairs until Inui, wearing a paper bag on his head, caught it just in time, and he quickly fixed the lunchbox and handed it back to Kitaro, who thanked him gratefully. While Inui decided to stay by Kitaro's side, helping him up the stairs, he realized he could never have worked as hard as Kitaro. Despite the discomfort caused by consuming all the food his classmates had provided, Ryo finished his report, and just as he was about to leave, one of his classmates told him that Kotaro was standing by the door, holding his lunch. Ryo asked if Kotaro had brought his lunch to him alone, while Saganuma asked if Ryo was still not satisfied. Hayato pushed his bread into his mouth, forcing him to keep quiet. Lying to Kotaro, Ryo hoped that he would forgive him, taking him to the stairwell, where they ate together while their classmates observed. When Rina told Yuki that her true rival was Kotaro, Yuki turned red and said she was dieting. Opening the lunchbox, Ryo discovered the contents were a mess, which disappointed Kotaro. However, Ryo didn't let this ruin their lunch and he fed him some rice, celebrating the success of Kotaro's solo mission. When Yuki was asked by her friends if she liked Ryo, her temperature suddenly shot up, and all the boys stared at her with a low-spirited look. As a result, she had no choice but to admit that she had feelings for him, and her friends supported her, saying that he was really good-looking. Ponytails suggested that Hayato was also a cool guy, but she still preferred Ryo nevertheless. Hearing this made Yuki think that her friends were going to be her rivals, but they reassured her not to worry and told her that she could have Ryo all to herself. Yuki was confused and told them not to hold back on her account, but they insisted that they wouldn't get involved, mentioning how anyone who wanted to get to Ryo's heart would have to get past his baby brother first. And also Inamata from the gifted class. They made fun of Inamata, saying she was too serious and had no love life at all, but unknown to them, she just happened to pass by the door and caught them in the act, causing their faces to turn blue. But before she could take action, she was interrupted by Ryo, who had just arrived at the door. However, that didn't stop her from revealing her most frightening face and lashing out at them for not closing the doors before engaging in petty gossip and leaving everyone in amazement. Hayato told Ryo he had stickers on his butt, and he wondered how the children had stuck them on him without him noticing. The girls thought Ryo looked cool with the butt stickers, which made the other guys wonder what girls really considered as a green flag for men. Meanwhile, the kids in the daycare room were on a mission to make Uzeda look cool top, so they experimented with different stickers on him. And as Inamata kept thinking about what she had heard the girls saying about her, she admitted that it was true. But she couldn't stop thinking about Ryo all the time. She thought back to the incident where he had given her a Valentine's Day present, and her face suddenly changed color. Two of the kids showed up and asked her if she was thinking about a guy, and she snapped and told them to mind their own business, causing the girl to cry and tell her she was mean. But she insisted that what she did was none of their business and wondered why they weren't in the daycare room. She asked if they were lost, but they said they actually came to play with her. Hearing this, Inamata fell to her knees and appreciated the kindness of the kids for thinking of her, but she told them that she didn't have time to play. And Kirin started to cry again, asking why she never came to see them. Inamata said it was because of him. But when the little girl asked who, her entire body turned red, and she couldn't answer. The girl thought that Inamata actually hated Ryo, and she told Kotaro to come with her so that they could come up with a plan to make Inamata understand how nice of a person Ryo was, hoping that she would start to like him. They invited Inamata to come with them, and Kirin sent Kotaro on a special mission, which he embarked on immediately. He entered Ryo's classroom, pretending he was lost, and Ryo picked him up and held him warmly in his arms, which made the girls feel heartwarming emotions. Kirin told Inamata that this was a display of how kind and accepting Ryo is, but Inamata said he was a little bit too kind. Hearing this, Kirin ran into the classroom to prove that Ryo could also be strict at times, and to achieve that, she cried and told him to hit her if he wanted her to be a good girl. But her plan failed when Hayato hit her instead. She cried tears, and Ryo picked her up and consoled her, but she continued to insist that he had to hit her so that Inamata would know how strict he could be. At that moment, Inamata burst into the classroom to bring an end to the whole drama, saying that it was enough and that she had proved her point, and making it clear that she didn't particularly hate Ryo as that was just a misunderstanding. At that point, Kirin posed the big question in front of everyone, asking Inamata if she liked Ryo or not. Everyone eagerly waited for her reply, and she said she certainly didn't like him and stormed out. Ryo ran after her and caught her arms, but as everyone eagerly looked on, he suddenly became a doofus and told her that she had a sticker on her skirt. And at that point, they all realized that he was a complete dumbass with no sense of emotional intelligence. Later on, Kirin explained everything that had happened to Ryo and told him not to get mad at her, but he just thanked her. However, when Uzeda asked Inamata what she thought of him, she said she believed he was a bad person. And all the kids joined in, saying he was definitely a bad person, which made Ryo laugh in return. The next day, Mamizuka came to the daycare with Takuma alone, And upon seeing this, Ryo asked him about Kazuma, but they told him that he had a cold and that his mom was taking care of him. Mamizuka was worried that Takuma would feel lonely without his brother, but Takuma seemed happy and was playing around. Yet he believed that Takuma was only trying to mask his loneliness by pretending to be happy. Uzeda approached Ryo and suggested they bet 100 yen on whether Takuma was actually fine or not, to which they agreed. So when they asked Takuma, he said he was feeling fine and lively as he had promised his brother not to be sad, causing Mamizuka to praise him for being so brave. Uzeda asked Mamizuka for the 100 yen he won, but instead, Mamizuka gave him a 500 yen gift card containing a photo of him on it, saying that he could buy many nice things with it. Ryo reminded Mamizuka that he had to go to work, and he agreed, but before he left, he asked them to take good care of Takuma and make sure he didn't feel lonely. However, when Mamizuka went to say goodbye to Takuma, Hayato showed up, and Takuma ran to him. Seeing this made Mamizuka cry, feeling that his son liked someone else more than him. He eventually left, and Takuma happily said goodbye, knowing he wouldn't see his father for a while. Taka wanted to play with Kitaro, but Takuma wouldn't let go of him, and as a result, Taka tried to hold Kitaro's hand to pull him away. But Takuma held on and started pulling from the other side, which caused Ryo to panic and cry out for them to stop playing so roughly. Taka suddenly got up and told Takuma that they needed to go beat the cold so that his brother would be fine, and Takuma instantly welcomed the idea. They went to climb on Uzeda and beat him up, and he couldn't help but wonder how beating Kazuma's cold meant beating him up, leaving him with no choice but to call for help. Hayato and Ryo decided that it was time for classes and left him to handle the children on his own, but he collapsed on the ground, saying he couldn't handle it. On their way to class, Ryo wondered if Takuma could really handle his brother's absence, but Hayato assured him that Takuma would be fine since he had the other kids to play with. However, Hayato was actually worried about Kazuma because he was alone and sick, and Ryo began to realize how close Takuma and Kazuma used to be. In class, he accidentally said out loud that they never wanted to be apart, which made Yuki wonder who Ryo was referring to, and if he never wanted to be apart from someone. During nap time, Takuma tried to reach out to his brother, but he ended up with Taka's stockings, and it made him realize how truly lonely he was. As such, he headed out of the room while the rest were sleeping, except for Kitaro, who saw him. Kitaro went to find Ryo and informed him that Takuma had run off on his own, and they searched for him and found him sitting all alone. Takuma asked if his brother was okay, and Ryo reassured him that his brother would be fine and he had nothing to worry about. But just then, their mother arrived with Kazuma in her arms, calling out to his brother, and expressing how much he had missed him. Overwhelmed with emotions, Takuma fell to the ground and cried upon seeing that his brother was safe, and their mother held both of them in her arms. Uzeda arrived and revealed that he had called her because he could see that Takuma was giving in, and in the end, the family bade them farewell as they took their leave. The next day, Ryo opened his shoe locker and found an unusual letter, but Yuzukawa instantly regarded it as a love letter and created an uproar. Ponytails was watching from a distance and she asked Yuki if she was the one who planted the letter in Ryo's locker, but Yuki denied doing so. Hayato collected the letter and began to investigate it, but Ryo told him to give it back. However, Hayato reassured him that he wouldn't open his letter. Just as Ryo was about to open the letter, Inamada interrupted them and warned them not to loiter around as they were blocking the way. But despite the interruption, Yuzukawa started reading the letter while Ryo and Inamada were still looking at each other. They were shocked to hear the confessions of a girl who loved Ryo deeply and couldn't sleep day or night because she couldn't stop thinking about him. Hayato suddenly commented how no one really slept during the day, but the letter further revealed that the girl would be waiting behind the school building the next morning, and hearing the contents of the letter made Ryo's face turn completely red. Yuzukawa asked if he liked the girl, but Ryo replied that he had never received a love letter before, and needed time to think before replying. As he started to leave, Yuzukawa pointed out that he was still wearing his indoor shoes, making him realize how confused he was, and as such, he even found it difficult to walk properly. He was unable to concentrate throughout the day as he kept blushing, and the other children quickly noticed it, and they kept asking him why he had turned red. Uzeda asked if he had caught a cold and needed to check his temperature, but he said he was fine. His little brother went to get a blanket for him out of kindness, but Ryo assured them that he was completely okay and they didn't need to worry. However, he had trouble doing things properly as he got through the day. At night, Seikawa congratulated him on his recent achievement, causing the chairwoman to ask what they were talking about, and Seikawa said Ryo had received a love letter from a girl at school. The chairwoman asked Ryo about it, but he quickly changed the topic to the delicious-looking bowl of red rice on the table, and the chairwoman lost interest and ordered him to bed. The next day, Ryo came out early to meet the girl at the designated place, and even though he was curious to see who it was, he had made up his mind to turn her down and thought about how to do it without sounding rude. Inamada and Yuki also came out early, eager to see what would happen, and coincidentally, they met each other on the way. And just as Yuki asked Inamada why her face was red, Ryo came running and grabbed Inamada's arm, asking if she had seen his little brother. He explained that after he let go of him, he suddenly disappeared. They said they didn't see any signs of him at all, and he started to leave. But she called him back and said she would help him look for Kotaro, and Yuki offered to help as well. While they were searching, Hayato appeared with Kotaro and explained that Kotaro had wandered into someone's yard to get a lemon for Ryo. This made Ryo realize that Kotaro had been looking out for him all along, and tears flowed from his eyes as he thanked Kotaro for his love and kindness. During the meeting at the appointed place, Ryo turned the girl down, and she left feeling totally rejected. Ryo wondered if he had made the right decision, but when Hayato asked why he chose to turn her down, he replied that taking care of Kotaro had to be his top priority. As both Inamada and Yuki had listened to what happened behind the bushes, Yuki wondered if the same thing would happen to them if they confessed their love to Ryo. But in reply, Inamada emphasized that she was not interested in him. Yuki then asked if they could be friends, and even though Inamada protested at first, they soon developed a bond with each other. Later that night, Taka called Kotaro and asked him to come to the festival with him, and Ryo told them that Kotaro would definitely come. He informed the chairwoman about their plans, and she gave them permission, but warned Ryo to be careful with his money. And on her final order, Seikawa prepared their outfits for the festival and showed them how to put them on. When they arrived at the festival, Hayato was surprised by their outfits and asked where they got them, but Ryo told him that Seikawa had given them to him. The kids ran off to play, but Ryo tried to warn them about getting lost, and Hayato promised to give Taka a whack on the head. Kotaro got a cotton candy, while Taka tried to play a lottery game that involved string pulling. However, Ryo and Hayato saved them from wasting a lot of money, and then they bumped into Yuzeda, who complimented Ryo's style of dressing, and also noticed Taka's disappointment and complaints about not being allowed to play the games. Yuzeda offered the kids a game to play but told them they had to pay first. However, Taka was only interested in the lottery, and started crying, and his crying amazed everyone around, including the fish in the water, until his brother gave him a whack on the head to bring him back to his senses. Ryo picked Taka up to console him, but Hayato told him that he was not obligated to do so since they were outside of school premises and Taka was no longer his responsibility. However, Ryo assured him that he was just helping out as a friend, but Hayato continued to make Taka cry. They returned to the festival to search for Taka's toy sword, which he had dropped while playing, but despite their efforts, they couldn't find it. A shop owner advised them to go to the lost and found office, but when they arrived at the office, they were shocked to see Yagi and a group of other girls there. He asked them what they were looking for, and they explained that they were searching for Taka's lost toy sword, but upon seeing the children, his nose started bleeding. Nezu, who was also in the office, showed them the lost and found swords they had, but none of them belonged to Taka. Hayato told Taka to give up on the sword and promised to take him to the lottery slot, and although it made Taka very sad to part ways with his favorite toy, he had no choice but to accept that it was lost forever. When they started the lottery, the old man asked Taka to pull a string, and Taka thought hard about which string to pull, but Hayato grew impatient every passing second. Just then, Kotaro randomly pulled a string, and miraculously, Taka's sword toy came out. Hayato wasted no time in confronting the old man about where he obtained the sword, and as an apology, they were given a piggy bank that resembled the newest gaming console. The chairwoman found it quite strange, but Seikawa was glad to see that the children had enjoyed themselves. On a sunny day at the beach, the children enjoyed the cool waters while Ryo looked after them, until their mothers came to assist, so that he could also go for a swim. Later, Inamada showed up in a plain and ugly school swimsuit, and this really bothered the housewives, so they told her that it was important for girls to look pretty at all times, forcing her to follow them for a makeover. Meanwhile, Yuzeda offered to watch the kids so that Ryo could go swimming, but he declined, saying that he was bothered because Kotaro wasn't used to the beach. He tried to show his baby brother that the water wasn't that scary, but ended up almost drowning in the process when a small wave hit them. The kids laughed at him, so he suggested that they play in the sand, but another heavy wave came and swiftly swept their sand creations away, causing them to be upset until the women returned with juice to appease them. Meanwhile, they'd finished giving Inamata a lovely makeover, and she was dressed in a pretty swimsuit. But the women were surprised that the boys didn't appreciate her new look. However, Inamata was happy, regardless of the silence from the boys, and she continued playing with the little baby, while Ryo, on the other hand, struggled to watch over Kotaro until he eventually fell asleep. Later, he finally got into the refreshing water with Hayato, who asked if he had been avoiding the water because he couldn't swim. But he explained that he was concerned about leaving his baby brother alone, adding that he felt bad that he wasn't enough reassurance for his brother. But Hayato knocked some sense into him and he cheered up. Shortly after, Kotaro woke up and was looking for his big brother, so he ran towards the water and saw Ryo diving into the water. Thinking that his brother was in danger, he got scared and started running into the water to rescue him. But the waves pushed him back into the safe hands of Midori's mother, who withheld him from plunging himself into the water again. But the little boy was upset and started crying and calling out for his older brother, and as soon as Ryo heard his voice, he swam to shore with the speed of light, leading Hayato to see that Ryo was even clingier than his baby brother. Eventually, Ryo held his brother and consoled him by giving him a seashell to listen to the waves of the ocean, while Midori's mother admired the closeness between both brothers. The next morning at the daycare, Taka was crying and showed Ryo a baseball with a poop scribbling on it. But he was confused until Mrs. Kamitani explained that it was an autographed ball that Hayato cherished so much, and because it upset him, he completely ignored his baby brother. She then asked Ryo if he could help her talk to Hayato, but he told her that there would be no one to watch after the children if he had gone. However, surprisingly, the chairwoman came in and offered to stay with the children, because she couldn't stand a wailing child disturbing the peace of the entire school. When he arrived at the baseball court, Kashima found Hayato aggressively and angrily swinging his bat, so one of his team members told him that he'd been that way since morning. He added that Hayato was one of their most talented players, but didn't practice enough times because he had to look after his brother. Finally getting Hayato's attention, Kashima told him to forgive his baby brother because Taka was sorry for his actions, and he also explained that Kotaro had destroyed a good number of his things as well. He recounted some of the things that Kotaro had damaged, and the most recent which he still hadn't gotten over was his cell phone, which Kotaro stole and threw into the toilet. At this point, he had almost started crying, but Hayato calmed him down, so he continued, saying that the little ones never really meant harm, and their actions were mostly accidental. Hayato explained that he wasn't exactly bothered about the ball, but was annoyed by Taka's lack of genuine remorse. But he still said he would let it slide because he was his baby brother after all. Meanwhile, at the daycare, Taka kept justifying his action by saying that his brother deserved it because he wouldn't play with him. In order to teach him a lesson, the chairwoman threatened to destroy his precious toy sword with a hammer, but he tearfully begged her not to, and she gave it back to him, before showing him that he had done something similar to his brother's baseball, and should accept his fault. When Kashima returned, he told Taka to apologize to his older brother, and he agreed to, so they waited for Heisto to be done with practice. However, when Hayato saw his baby brother, he started walking away, so Taka ran towards him, stumbling in the process. He got up and latched onto his big brother's leg, apologizing amidst tears, while Hayato patted his head and also apologized for not spending enough time playing with him. On their way home, Hayato told Ryo that they'd all play baseball at the daycare the next day, and even though Ryo thought it was too much for the children, the little boys did not agree with him. On the day of their school's cultural festival, the daycare had set up a refreshment stand, and the kids were dressed in bouncy vegetable costumes to celebrate the day, but it was quite chaotic, as they kept falling and bumping into each other. Innocently, Ryo said that Useda's vegetable costumes were creative, but it meant that he had to get into one of them, and Mrs. Kumatsuka's entrance startled him, so he fell and couldn't get up. Eventually, Taka and Kotaro joined him and started rolling on the floor with him, until Hayato came to their rescue. Miss Kumatsuka urgently had to return to her home, and her daughter, Kirin, was sad, but she reassured her that her father would be coming for the festival in her place, and then she asked the daycare for a favor. Meanwhile, a heavily bearded man met Inui and asked him if he could take him to the daycare. Just then, Kirin's dad burst in, full of excitement, and he gushed over his little baby girl who was dressed in her cute carrot costume, so he took pictures of her. Also, after seeing his wife, he ran to her with a bouquet of flowers, leaning in for a smooch that almost scared the kids for life. Swiftly, she blocked his kiss and told him to greet the daycare babysitters. Weirdly, all the guys were all dressed up as women, and Useda used a very funny feminine voice to greet Kirin's father. But the man saw through their disguise and was furious when he discovered that his precious daughter was completely surrounded by guys, except for cute baby Midori. He then went on to ask the innocent boys what their intentions were with his daughter, and being kids, the boys said they all liked Kirin. But the jealous father called them filthy beasts. Kirin said she liked them all as well, but Taka said he didn't like her. Surprisingly, this upset her father, who couldn't believe that the little jerk didn't like his precious daughter. Kirin's father was fed up, so he decided to take his daughter away, but Ryo held him back and tried convincing him to trust the babysitters. However, Mr. Kumatsuka believed that Ryo was actually a girl, so he began gushing over him, saying that he would have asked him out 15 years ago. However, baby Midori ended the show when she pulled Ryo's wig, exposing his true nature. As Kirin's dad was about to leave again, Hayato told him that he won't be leaving with the girls, and at that point, with cute teary eyes, Kirin reminded her dad about the performance she had been preparing for. So he told her that he had certainly come to watch her perform, and also to meet the cute babysitters that he had imagined there would be. Suddenly, the rough-looking bearded man came in, escorted by Inui, and introduced himself as Midori's father, while he greeted Kirin's father and thanked Inui, who was visibly heartbroken to find that he was Yukari's husband. The show had started, and Kirin finally presented her drink to her dad, causing him to be emotional as he imagined her growing older and getting married someday. The other fathers were moved and joined him in tears, and after Kataro's presentation, Seikawa clapped from behind Ryo, jump-scaring his useless ass until he told him that he came to deliver his apologies on behalf of the chairwoman, who couldn't make it because she had a visitor. At the end of the event, Kirin's father offered to give them free snapshots because they had taken good care of his daughter, although he strongly emphasized that he didn't want his precious girl to be involved in strange activities with boys. It was another day at the dorm, and Taka was wailing in pain after receiving his daily dose of Hayato's heavy knocks. But his older brother was not even sorry, and even threatened the other kids to give them a taste of his metallic fist if they annoyed him. Mercifully, Mrs. Kaminata came to the rescue and returned the favor to her older son, warning him against being violent to the other children, and apologizing for the disturbance her sons had caused. She told Ryo that he was a good boy, unlike her coconut-headed older son, and even though she wondered where he got his stubbornness from, the answer was very obvious to everyone else. She came to ask the kids if they were willing to see bird eggs in the science lab that would soon be hatching into chicks. But before she finished talking, they were already excited to go see the chicks, until she said the eggs wouldn't hatch until the next day. Equally excited, Ryo said that he would love to have the chicks attached to him and following him like he was mother hen. But Hayato told him that the kids were already glued to him like chicks, and that should be enough for him. Later, the children were at the science lab and were disappointed to find that there were no chicks. When they pointed at a machine which they called a refrigerator, Ryo told them that it was an incubator, but they kept shouting that he was a liar. Mrs. Kaminata left Ryo to handle the mess she had created, but her son threatened them to order with his terrifying fist, and they ran into the very arms of the one they called a liar. When they had calmed down, Ryo gently explained that the incubator was keeping the eggs warm and preparing them to hatch the next day, so they would have to be patient. However, unlike the others, Kotaro was patiently watching the eggs while his friends caused problems in the lab. Early the next morning, Kotaro dragged his brother to the lab, and luckily for them, the chicks were very close to hatching, so they watched in anticipation, and Mrs. Kaminata admired them, while comparing them to her good-for-nothing sons. After waiting for several hours and almost running out of strength, the chicks eventually hatched, and later, the chicks had imprinted on Kotaro, thinking he was their mother. Seeing this, Taka was jealous and wanted to play with them too, but he only succeeded in scattering them. And just when they wanted to catch the chicks, a cat appeared on the windowsill and instantly wanted to grab one of them. However, Kotaro instinctively sacrificed himself by using his body to protect the chick, but was miraculously saved by Hayato's timely intervention when he grabbed the cat and placed it outside the house. When it was all over, Ryo was impressed with his brother's bravery and commended him for it, while Kotaro was happy to have his chick safe and sound. The weather was getting colder as winter approached, and sadly, Uzeda was one of the first people to feel its effects. After coming down with a cold, he couldn't make it to the daycare, so he called in sick, confessing to Ryo that the previous night, he had foolishly slept with no clothes on, after a cold shower. This made Ryo almost sacrifice his day in school to take care of the children, but Seikawa appeared behind him, saying that he would be taking Uzeda's place at the daycare, because Uzeda had asked him to help. To prove that he was equal to the task, Seikawa showed him a book that he had been studying to learn tips on how to care for babies like Midori. Eventually, Ryo felt at ease and handed the children over to Seikawa before heading to class, realizing that he might have been overthinking things, as Seikawa was usually a very dependable person. As soon as Ryo left, Seikawa noticed that the children were nervous, so he was thinking of ways to make them comfortable with him, when Kotaro tapped him and gave a nod of reassurance in his toddler way, and this encouraged him to make a move. He called them together and admitted that in order to run things smoothly, he would need their assistance and encouragement. Hearing this, the children were excited, because this meant that somehow they were in charge, and so they all happily offered to teach him things he didn't know. Meanwhile, Uzeda was imagining that the kids would be missing him deeply, even though he knew that it was highly unlikely. But just when he wanted to fall asleep, a call came in from Seikawa. However, the network was so terrible that he only heard him mention Midoriya's name, and something about an emergency. Immediately, the call cut, and Uzeda dialed the number again, but it was switched off, so he became worried. Apparently, at the daycare, Midori had soaked her diaper, not sparing Seikawa's back, so he wanted to change her into a new set, and Taka and Kirin eagerly offered to help, but they mistakenly bumped into each other and soaked all the diapers. It was when Seikawa called to tell Uzeda about Midori's diaper emergency that the feisty baby threw his phone into water, causing the call to disconnect. Seeing the disaster they had caused, Kirin and Taka started crying and blaming each other, and when the other kids saw them crying, they joined in, turning it into a noisy crying party. However, Kotaro gave a silent, reassuring nod to Seikawa, and he decided to swing into action, in order to take control of the situation. Meanwhile, Ryo was exercising with his classmates, when he accidentally bumped into Uzeda, who instantly fell to the floor. He was surprised to see him in school despite being sick, so he offered to take him to the school's nurse. But Uzeda explained that he was rushing to the daycare, because he was called about an emergency concerning baby Midori. When they got there, they saw the daycare in a peaceful state with the children playing happily, so Ryo asked Seikawa about his so-called emergency with Midori. After explaining the diaper situation, he told them that he had already sorted it out with a makeshift diaper. The children then told Uzeda that they were fine without him, and they wanted him to return home to rest and recover quickly. This brought tears to his eyes, and just then, baby Midori blurted out her first word towards him, which sounded like she was trying to pronounce his name. When they were told, her parents were jealous because despite their efforts to teach her their names, her first word was Uzeda's name, or something that sounded like it. Later, Yuki was peeping on Ryo, even though she tried to deceive herself that she wasn't, and while she was hiding from one of the kids who had spotted her, Inamata found her, causing her to frantically try to explain why she was there. Trying to calm her down, Inamata assumed that she was shy of admitting that she wanted to play with the children, so she confessed that she also found the children to be really cute and she could escort her to go play with them if she wanted to. However, the look on Yuki's face explained that she didn't share the same sentiments with her, and Inamata instantly felt ashamed because she had exposed her little secret. But Yuki confessed that she wasn't very good with kids. Unfortunately for Yuki, who had been trying to be perfect for her Prince Charming, he opened the window at that instant and hurt her. But Inamata swiftly intervened and turned it into an operation to make Yuki become fond of children, so she dragged her off to the daycare, as she emphasized that it was important to prepare Yuki for her future as a mother. As soon as Yuki got to the daycare, the children fell in love with her and were glued to her. However, Inamata felt bad that the children had never shown that type of interest in her, but the foolish Ryo had nothing reasonable to say to make her feel better. When they went outside, the babysitters divided the kids amongst themselves and paired Yuki with Kotaro, since he was the calmest of all the kids there. Just a few minutes into holding his hand, Yuki found him to be really adorable, until she saw something like a tear drop coming from his eyes, and bent to clean it, but found out that it was mucus from his nose. She freaked out, and Taka came to her rescue, saying he didn't mind cleaning yucky baby snot. However, she was yet to see the worst, when Kirin returned with some gifts for her, telling her to open her hands, and blessed her with maggots and cockroaches. Unsurprisingly, she fainted on the spot and was taken to the sickbay. But when she woke up, she was disappointed in herself and opened up to Ryo, saying that she knew that he and Inamata were disappointed in her, because even though she was a young lady, she had done a terrible job at managing children. She also said that her chances of ever getting married were almost zero. However, Ryo told her that he understood her because kids could be a handful and difficult to handle, but he assured her that she would get better with them if she began to fall in love with each child's individual personality. As he was talking, Uzeda brought the kids, who wanted to apologize for freaking her out. Kirin brought her some flowers and Yuki thanked her and asked them if she could play with them again another day, causing the children to be excited. Immediately after, she ran after Inamata and hugged her, while thanking her for presenting the golden opportunity with the children, which brought about a positive change in her. Days later, Ryo received a call from one of his classmates who was inviting him for an outing, but he declined because he didn't want to leave Kotaro behind. However, Seikawa overheard him and immediately offered to watch over Kotaro while he was gone, because the chairwoman had said that he should encourage Ryo to socialize with his classmates. Eventually, he agreed to go, even though that would be the first time he was going out without his baby brother, so before leaving, he told Kotaro to be a good little boy to Seikawa. It was just the two of them, so Seikawa decided to lighten the mood by asking Kotaro if he wanted any snack. But his strategy didn't work, so he decided to play with him. Meanwhile, Ryo had just arrived at the meeting venue, and Hayato came shortly after with bite marks on his cheeks. He explained that it was because he refused to allow Taka to follow him, but after he was bitten by his baby brother, he blessed him with his golden fist and left. He also said that unlike Ryo, who loved his brother so much, he felt nothing of the sort for Taka, so the boys threatened to destroy his reputation with the girls by telling them about how bad of an older brother he is. Back at home, Seikawa was doing a good job with Kotaro, and he drew Ryo's face on a ball, making the little one go after it, up until the ball led the boy into a library. Seikawa then told him that the library belonged to the late couple, and they, just like Kotaro, were deeply in love with books. Also, despite the fact that the grumpy old lady said there was no point in him cleaning a room that no longer had occupants, she would occasionally clean it up, probably because of Ryo and his younger brother. Interrupting his thoughts, Kotaro gave Seikawa a romance poetry book to read out to him. Then the old lady saw them by the window, and wondered what nonsense Seikawa was reading to the little boy. It was a little late, but Kotaro waited eagerly for his older brother to return, and when Ryo came in, his baby brother ran up to him and held him. He presented a souvenir that he got from the movie he watched at the cinema, and although it was a zombie model, Seikawa gladly received it and told him he was grateful for the time he spent with little Kotaro. They were interrupted by the old lady, who sent Seikawa to prepare dinner, and Ryo, upon some inner reflection, realized that they were comfortable enough to call that house their new home. December had arrived, and along with it came a lot of decorations as people prepared to celebrate Christmas. With Santa Clauses at every corner, Kotaro was obsessed to the extent that he made Ryo late to school one day. When they arrived at the daycare, he continued to stare at a flyer with a small Santa picture on it. So Taka came and told him he had met a much cooler Santa Claus at a departmental store, and even asked him for a gift. However, the big-for-nothing Uzeda told him that because he wasn't a good boy and didn't eat his broccoli, Santa would not visit him. This made little Taka cry, until his big brother came to his aid and punched some sense into Uzeda's silly head. But Taka still wanted to know if Santa would be visiting their home. However, his dark-hearted older brother started telling him that their mother had gotten them presents at the departmental store, until Ryo quickly covered his mouth to prevent him from completely shattering the boy's hopes. Kotaro, however, cheered his friend when he called him a good boy, and told him that Santa was definitely going to come. The countdown began and it was only a few days until Christmas, so the children were all very excited, while their parents were getting worked up over what presents they should get for them. 3 days to the big day, Ryo was worried about how to get a Santa Claus for his brother and the other children, so he wanted to see if he could fit the role, and tried putting some clothes in his shirt to create the characteristic Santa pot belly. When his friends saw that he was doing it to make his younger brother happy, they were so moved, and even though his phone was damaged and he couldn't search for costumes online, they decided to help him. Hayato suddenly left the class, and Ryo wanted to follow him, but he refused and headed directly to the chairwoman's office. Finally, it was Christmas Day, and there was a beautifully decorated Christmas tree in the house, which left the two brothers in awe. Even more astonishing was that Seikawa had set up a large feast on the table, which exceeded what the brothers could consume. However, Kotaro was sad that there was no one to sit with them at the table, because the chairwoman had an important dinner to attend, and Seikawa also couldn't stay because he was busy. Before he left, he told the brothers that he felt really happy to be missed by the both of them, and would have loved to eat with them if he didn't have to leave. Obviously, Kotaro was unhappy, so Ryo cheered him up, saying that they should eat their meal and wait for Santa. After saying this, Ryo was looking for a way to change into his Santa costume so that he could present a gift to his baby brother, But Kotaro frustrated his plans and gave him no space at all as he was glued to him every step of the way. Suddenly, the doorbell interrupted Ryo's thoughts, and when he opened the door, he was surprised to see a Santa Claus, along with their friends, parents, and children from the daycare. Seikawa and the chairwoman were also present, and she gave him a small present, telling him that she left the function early enough to make it in time. The brothers were really happy, and when Ryo opened his gift, he saw a new phone, just exactly like his old phone that broke, and realized that it was Hayato that told the chairwoman about his broken phone the day he went out without him. Although their parents were no more, the boys had found a home, with people that loved and cared so much about them. And to wrap it all up, they all gathered to take a photo that captured the unforgettable memories of that beautiful day. Set your heart ablaze, go beyond your limits, and watch this next video.